Because of this challenge, God was forced to reveal himself. And what did God say? Did God say, I'm sorry? Did God say, I shouldn't have done it? Did God say, the devil made a bet with me and I did the best I could to win? God said, did you create Leviathan? Could you catch him on a hook? Could you fill his head with harpoons? I did. In other words, he said, I am great. And that was the answer. And Job was convinced. And Job, you might say, abandoned his loyalty to the human values. And Job said, I have heard of you with my ears. I now behold you with my eyes. I cover my head with ashes. I'm ashamed. This, in the dialogue between the God principle and the man principle, shows the victory of God. And this, I would say, is the basic thesis of the Levant. Who is man, O Lord, that thou shouldst think of him at all? Obey. The sacred book revealed tells you what to do. The relationship problem is solved in terms of acquiescence of the human to the divine. This is the great heroism of the religious man. In contrast to him, I would take as my symbol of the European idea Aeschylus's Prometheus, who was also tormented by a god unjustly. Zeus had him pinned with a stone, with an iron peg to a mountain, and sent an eagle to eat his liver. And the liver grew back every night, so that it was always there to be eaten the next day. And this endless, hideous torment was imposed upon him by Zeus. Why? Because he had stolen the heavenly fire from man. He had done exactly what the people who built the Tower of Babel were trying to do. He was trying to storm heaven and to get for man the values of a human civilization. And there's that fabulous line of Aeschylus, which is in diametric contrast with the other fabulous line of Job. Job, who is man? I submit. Remember Prometheus' words? When an emissary from Zeus came and said, just say you're sorry, and he will let you go. Prometheus said, I care less than nothing for Zeus. Let him do what he likes. I am not going to renege on the human system of values. These are what I stand for, these are what I represent, and these, I would say, are what the Greeks represent, and these are what I would say all the inheritors of that great Greek world represent. And these are not the same values as those represented by Job. And now we come to the agony of the Western psyche. With these two systems of ideals, one preaching the beauty and majesty of the religious submission before God, the other, the heroism of the humane or humanistic insistence on the values of man, these are in collision, and distinctly so in the Christian tradition, I would say, more than in any others. The figure of Christ himself on the cross is precisely a Promethean figure. He's precisely a Job figure. And he has got for man, from God, redemption. The Christian thesis is that man sinned, disobeyed, was rejected from the garden, and is by Christ's death and suffering, Promethean deed, returned to God's grace. And just as Prometheus seized for man the fire of civilization. Christ seized the fire of redemption and is crucified for it by God. Consider, however, what happens in the Christian reading of this story. Christ is God who has come down to do this, and we are not God. Now, in the Indian story that I spoke of earlier in the hour, all of us are that being. We are all divine. That divine power is immanent in us all. And what the God incarnate represents is our own very being. In that sense, we are all Christ's crucifix. That being which is our own very life and is, as it were, inhibited in its manifestation through our own limitations, that is the Christ crucified. And this is the standpoint of the so-called Gnostic tradition. You can read in the Thomas Gospel, "Split the stick and there am I," says Jesus. Christ sleeps in the stone. Thou art the crucifix of Christ, and he is what you are trying to discover in yourself. This is, as it were, the Promethean view of man mixed with the Job view of God. And it is perhaps the best synthesizing symbol we have. That each individual in his own way is, so to say, the incarnation. And at once the limitation and the possibility of this divine revelation, the highest manifestation of which is you as the individual. Schopenhauer brought this out in his wonderful philosophy when he said, every individual is the entire divinity of the world in his own way. This is a kind of synthesizing symbol to point out the divinity of the individual and at the same time to stress the human value system which he represents. I would say that in most recent times, the strongest statement of the principle of the individual is that of Nietzsche's philosophy and the idea of the Superman. This has been a greatly misrepresented point of view. There's been a general tendency to confuse Nietzsche's view of the Superman with his view of the Master Man. They're not the same. Nietzsche speaks of the naive man-animal, powerful in his life, who lacks, however, the sense of the spirit. And then there is the principle of what he calls the man of the decadence, who is questioning man's problems and so forth, the intellectual, the Socratic man, who is, as he says, the sick man, the master man and the man of the decadence. The Superman is the one who embraces both principles, who both has the courage to live and has the wit to question life, to query it. Thomas Mann, in all of his writings, used this as his ideal. The ideal of the man with the intellect and the words that kill, that name life, that know all its faults, and yet has the courage and sympathy to love life in its faults and with its faults and because of its faults. Nietzsche's idea of the Superman is beautifully summarized in Mann's writings when he speaks of the plastic irony of the writer's craft. And I will end this little summary of a very, very big subject by bringing this as my final point. Perhaps you remember the wonderful little story of Tonio Kruger, the young boy who grew up in a perfectly normal, very successful Bürger family in North Germany, and was more sensitive